Did you know in Nepalese culture, it's like really offensive to talk about somebody's parents? And so my coworker from Nepal said that he has a really hard time getting behind yo mama jokes, and he finds them like,
Because it's just taboo.
yeah, like you would never make a joke about somebody's mom.
Yeah.
Unless you like hated that person and you were trying to be mean.
Mm-hmm.
He just can't get behind the lighthearted yo mama jokes. And he like every time he hears them, he like feels kind of mad and upset. It's like interesting.
Yeah. Not really popular anymore.
No, but somebody at work was like, your mom. And he goes, whoa, don't do that. And then we're like, what? And then he explained about his whole culture thing. We're like, oh. Because they work with teenagers. They still do the your mom. Never goes out of style.
Welcome back to another episode of Is Fitz Happy? I'm Luke.
And I'm Emma.
And this week we're continuing our discussion on chapter 29, Kennit's Women.
Still a bad chapter title.
Still a bad chapter title.
Still hate it.
Hate the possessive S on that. So last episode, we talked about half of this chapter so far. It started with the sea serpents desperate to wake up Vivacia to help them realize their dream of going to the cocooning grounds. And then we had Kennit being gross as usual, being attacked by Althea, and then Etta fighting Althea, and Wintrow comforting Etta and not choosing Althea at any of those points.
Right.
This week, we get to dive back in to a new point of view and continue that discussion. Hooray for us.
And we get to start with Kennit's point of view.
Yes. We switch back over to Kennit's point of view as he approaches the figurehead. The crew's all looking at him, and he dares not to hurry. The fight between the two women had been bad enough, he thinks. They would not witness him racing to the ship's summons, no matter how urgent. So he grits his teeth as he's limping, and he notes that Althea had left several bruises that were starting to ache. And he eventually gets up to the top and says, "Ship, I'm here. What do you want?" The figurehead swiveled to look at him, and he gasped. Her eyes had gone green, not a serpent green, but a human green, and her features had lost the reptilian cast they had assumed of late. She did not entirely look as Vivacia had, but this was definitely not Bolt. He almost stepped back from her. "I'm here too. What do I want? I want Althea Vestrit out here on the foredeck. I want her companion Jack as well, and I want them here now." So he deliberately uses the name Bolt in his replies, and he's just saying like, "Oh, I'm afraid that's not feasible." And the ship immediately kind of cuts him off. It's like, "Hey, you know I'm not Bolt. Are you Vivacia then?" "I am myself, in my entirety. If you must name me by a name, then address me as Vivacia, for that part of me is as integral as the plank I was built from. But I did not call you to discuss my name or identity. I want Althea and Jack brought here now." "Why?" "To see them for myself, to know that they are not being ill-treated." So that's the first hint that Kennit gets. It's like, okay, she doesn't know everything.
Right.
So he keeps up this facade like, oh, they're not being ill-treated. And she replies, "I know what you did." And so he finally has to stand still and be like, has my luck deserted me? Is everything going wrong today? And then he continues on with his lies, saying, "Are you so swift to believe such evil of me?" "How can you ask me something like that?" She was not absolutely certain. He read it in her response. Once she had cared for him in a gentler way than Bolt had. Could he rouse that in her again? He ran his hands soothingly along the railing. "Because you see, not with your eyes, but with your heart. Althea believes she experienced something horrible, and so you believe her. Ship, you know me. You have been inside my mind. You know me as no one else can. Can you believe that I am capable of such a thing?" It is the greatest wrong that can be done to a female, human or dragon. It affronts and disgusts me on all levels. If you have done this, Kennit, it is irreparable. Not even your death could atone for it. There was more than human fury repressed in her voice. There was a cold reptilian implacability. It went beyond revenge and retaliation to annihilation. It sent a chill up his spine. He gripped her railing to steady himself. His voice was tight with self-justification when he spoke. And he continues on saying, like, I intend no harm at all to Althea Vestrit. Hurting her or offending her would run counter to all my hopes. Truth be told, in the few days since she came aboard, I have conceived a great fondness for her. My feelings for her bewilder and confuse me. I am not sure how to deal with them. And what of Etta? And so then he thinks, like, okay, well, Vivacia didn't like Etta. She was very jealous. Bolt liked her, and Etta liked Bolt. So then he runs right down the middle saying, like, I'm torn, you know? Etta's great, but liking Althea is like liking you because you're family.
Right. I don't know. I just want to pause here for a second because, again, I'm going to bring up the fact that his charm is staying silent through all of this.
Yeah.
And like you said, maybe it's because it can't connect to the oneness or whatever. However,
still has a voice.
Yeah, it could right now say, no, he's lying. Like out loud. Be like, he's lying or he did it, you know, at any point. And yet nothing. Nothing from the peanut gallery.
Yeah.
Just allowing all of this to happen, allowing him to confuse Bolt X Vivacia.
See, the only thing that I can think of as an excuse for the charm in this case is that he's hoping that Kennit will still abide by his promise to go up the Rainwild River and escort the serpents. Because if Kennit is, I don't know, deposed or killed or talks to the ship in any way like this, Kennit will never fulfill that promise. And if he is deposed or killed or something, there's no guarantee that the person who takes over would do anything with the serpents. So that's the only reason I can see that the charm would stay silent, is the hopes that the dragon race would continue with the fulfillment of that protecting the serpent's promise.
Okay.
That's the only thing I can see. But otherwise, I agree with you that staying silent here is totally against what the charm already threatened Kennit with.
Right.
So I don't know. Don't know what's going on with it.
But we do learn that as the charm had warned Kennit, this is an act that is unforgivable to dragons.
Yeah.
Like, it's not allowed.
It scares Kennit with the depth of how taboo it is in dragonkind as well.
Yeah, because it's not just Vivacia's voice. It's also Bolt's voice coming through, being like, this is literally the worst thing you could done, and even your death could not atone for this, which, love that energy. But it is not, like, it's not enough to scare him into telling the truth. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And he tries to flatter, saying, you know, I don't intend any harm on Althea. I just have a crush on her because she reminds me so much of you.
And it's so confusing because, like, I do like Etta and she's improved herself so much, but she suffers in comparison to Althea. How could she not? And then adds that connection with the family there. It's like, I don't know. A part of the attraction is that she is so much a part of you. The same family that shaped you created her. To be with her is, in a sense, to be with you. So still trying to flatter the dragon in her, and it does kind of work.
Right, and play on that, like, feelings that they had of, oh, we're so close. I would never lie to you. You know me better than anyone, which is crazy behavior. Because you would think the fact that he has hidden stuff from both Bolt and Vivacia, and they both know that, should be enough of a red flag in that.
Right.
But I guess they're just both willfully ignoring that part.
And he knows he kind of has her here. And even reading this as a reread when I haven't read it for a while, I knew that Kennit, like, convinced her at this moment, because then she stays silent for a while and then switch tacks to Paragon.
Right.
It's like, oh, but I have Bolt's memories. I saw you kill Paragon. And Kennit's like, no. I helped him die. It was what he wanted. I only made it easier for him. And then the ship easily gets off that topic and is like, well, Brashen was dear to me.
Yeah.
And then Kennit's like, oh, I didn't know that. I'm sorry. And that's it.
Yeah, but he was a true captain to the end. He didn't want to leave his ship.
Yeah. And then he goes on saying, well, you have Bolt's memories, you said. Then you will remember she wanted Althea dead. I refused that. What does she remember of Althea's rape? His lips scarce touched the word. Nothing, the ship admitted. She refused to touch minds with Althea. But I know what Althea recalls. Relief fueled his voice with kindness. And Althea recalls a nightmare, a poppy dream, not a reality. Such dreams are especially vivid. I do not blame her, or you, for believing her nightmares were real. I blame myself. I should not have given her poppy syrup. I meant no harm, only to help her rest and give her time to absorb the tragedy that had changed her life. So this is the circling back to the beginning of the chapter. Kennit wanted to convince Althea of it, but instead he gets to convince the ship.
He gets to convince everybody else.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, it has good results.
Yeah.
Nobody believes her. Well, except Wintrow and Etta, but they're not going to do anything about it. So.
Right. And now we get the parallel between Wintrow and the ship, Vivacia / Bolt here. You have become precious to me. It gives me pain even to try to believe such things of you. For me to admit such a horrendous act by you means I must admit I have been duped and deceived as to all you are. If it is true, it will make lies of all truths there have ever been between us. Please, please tell me she is mistaken. Tell me you could not have done such an odious thing. What one wants to believe badly enough becomes real. And so Kennit continues on his lies, and because Vivacia wants to believe it so much, it is real. He's like, yeah, I'm going to bring out Althea and Jack. You'll see for yourself that they've taken no harm. Althea may have a few bruises, but probably fewer than she gave me. She's not a large woman, but she is spirited. And a faint smile comes to Vivacia's lips, and like, yeah, she is at that. She always has been.
I just want to quickly point out, the ship begs him and says, tell me you could not have done such an odious thing. He does not reply to that. He just says,
I will show you my proof.
Yeah. So he doesn't say, no, I didn't do it. I don't think he said that at all. Any of these. He's just trying to deflect, saying, like, oh, she's out of her mind. Like, that didn't happen. He's saying it didn't happen, but he's never said, I did not rape her. Like, he's not,
right.
Defending his name. He's more pushing on the fact that she's crazy and doesn't know what she's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a really important detail here when the ship says, please tell me you didn't do this.
It's like, oh, I'm just going to show you the proof that I'm right.
Yeah, I'll show you proof I'm right. Because when somebody wants something to be true, you can make it so.
Yeah. But that's the parallel right there, is that both Wintrow and Vivacia so desperately want to believe that Kennit is telling the truth. Because then their whole existence and Vivacia's whole independence that she gained is built on lies. He promises her to bring them out immediately, and Wintrow's coming up onto the foredeck, and he sees Wintrow's face change. Wintrow's dark eyes, so troubled, kindled. Life came back into Wintrow's face when he sees the figurehead. Life flows into it as if he were a carved statue awakening. He starts forward eagerly, and Kennit's like, oh, this is not good. We can't have you reconnecting with Vivacia here. So I am the only claim to Vivacia. I can't have anyone else reassert their claim. I'm very jealous owner of a Liveship. So he heads Wintrow off and says, hey, free Althea and Jack. Bring them up here. He gave Kennit an oddly measuring look. Kennit read it plainly. Wintrow wondered whom to believe. The pirate shrugged it off. To wonder was not to know. His luck was holding. He considered the boy through the darkness. With a wrench, he wondered if he could part with Wintrow, if he had to. The idea dismayed him, but if Wintrow forced him to it, then it must be done in a way that did not compromise his luck, nor alienate the crew. Perhaps he could die in a selfless service to Kennit. That might perhaps be arranged. The crew might find it inspiring to witness such dedication. He looked at him, mourning him already, then steeled himself to the harshness of life. And then says to Wintrow out loud, joyously, as you can see, Vivacia has rejoined us. Go get them, Bring Althea and Jack up onto the foredeck. I myself will see that Althea's old room is made more fitting for them to share. He turned back to the ship, but his words were for Wintrow as well. I will do all I can for their comfort. You will see in the days to come that they are my honored guests, not prisoners.
Yeah, so he's really playing it up. Like, how could he be the bad guy here?
Right.
He's willing to let Althea come to deck.
And if I have to, I guess I'll let Wintrow go by arranging his death.
Yeah. Oh, it'll be so sad.
And then mourns him already in half an instant and then steals himself to the life. Oh, Kennit.
And then we go to the last viewpoint for the chapter, which is Wintrow.
Not the last, actually. We have Althea right at the end, too.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah. We get her rage for sure. And then I think Wintrow once more. So that would be the last.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's a long one this time. We switch back and forth quite a bit. But Wintrow frees Jack first, and he thinks it's probably cowardly, but he frees Jack before Althea, and then explains what he's doing. But Jack is like looking at him distrustfully because she has been locked up here. He is part of the crew, right? She snatches the keys out of his hand and then immediately goes to Althea's room. His aunt's shoulder caught the tall woman in her sternum because Althea charges into Jack. Althea, it's me. It's Jack. Calm down. After a moment, Althea does stop struggling. Her hair was wild. Her eyes dilated to black pits. She breathed a stench of vomit. I have to kill him. Promise me you'll help me kill him. Althea, what's wrong with you? She turned a furious gaze on Wintrow. What has been done to her? He raped me, Althea gasped. Kennit raped me. He kept coming into my room, pretending kindness and kissing me, and then... And my ship. He's been holding my ship down under where she couldn't see or feel the wind. Jack looked at Wintrow over Althea's bent head, horrified at her friend's rambling state. You'll be all right now, she said faintly. Her eyes were uncertain. Vivacia is asking for you right now. It was the most comforting thing he could think to say. She wants you to come to her right away. My ship, Althea half sobbed and then staggers free, going down the hallway. Jack demands, like, what's wrong with her? And he explains it's too much Poppy, and then he found he was talking to empty air, because she had already gone after Althea, not even listening to his response.
Right. So I think that, I don't know, because when would he have heard that she had taken Poppy if he didn't know ahead of time?
Right, because, I mean, Kennit had said that he was giving her medicine and stuff like that.
Right. So, I don't know. It just like, the whole thing, it just makes me mad that they knew she was getting dosed with Poppy and then she's acting drugged and they're like, man, she's insane.
You know, yeah. What I hate about this is that Jack is expressing such sympathy for Althea here, but it's on the side of what has been done to her mentally.
Right.
And later on, we see that Jack does not believe Althea.
Yeah.
And it's kind of set up of like, oh, at least there's some sympathy for Althea here. And then it's like taken away.
Immediately.
Because the reader wants to believe that Jack will believe.
Yes. Because why wouldn't Jack believe?
Yeah, but the hints are there that it's just like, why is she so crazy?
Yeah, like what did they do to her?
Right.
What, like mentally?
Ugh. And then we switch over to Althea because that point of view was short.
Right.
And she is staggering up to the foredeck. It's hard to get up there, and Jack does help her onto it because she is incredibly weak. She is stumbling around.
Right.
Vomit is on her shirt. Her eyes are super dilated. Her hair is draggled.
Right. And I just want to go back to this because you were thinking that she always drinks all of the wine or whatever.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious. Yeah.
Althea, when we saw her, when she accuses Kennit of drugging her the first time, she's not like, she's a little loose on her feet and obviously the like isn't fully there.
Yeah.
But it's not to this extent.
Right.
Like I feel like this is so much worse than we've seen her. And could that be because she went through a very traumatic event and
hasn't eaten for a day?
Yeah, hasn't eaten and also was on the verge of death and vomited or whatever. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know how it works.
But you think this is just so much like...
Yeah, I feel like the dose was just way more than she normally gets for her to be like over 24 hours later, still this affected by the drugs.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's pretty indicative that she had a lot of them when before she could at least like stand by herself mostly and be coherent.
Right.
And not that she's not being coherent here, but it is a little hard for her. She's slurring some words. It keeps saying that she's like lolling her head and she looks like a poisoned cat or whatever. And that's so much worse than any other depiction we've gotten of her. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
So she's walking towards the figurehead, and in her head is thinking about everything that she has lost. And she's finally going to the place that she was meant to be. She's pinning all of her hopes on Vivacia. Somehow, if she could just reach the foredeck and once more look into Vivacia's eyes, she could deal with it all. It would not hurt less, the grief would not be eased, but there would still be something in her life worth the effort of living. That dog's son, Kennit, still stood on the foredeck. He had the nerve to look down on her and smile welcomingly. And Jack helps her up the ladder because she can't really
do it on her own.
Yeah, do it on her own. And she's kind of confused a little bit.
Not only that, but Kennit moves away from the ladder and she thinks, good, because she would have pulled him down.
Yeah. So she crawls up a little bit and then suddenly Jack was beside her and pulls her to her feet. Let me go. I want to go alone. You're not well, Kennit said sympathetically. I hold none of this against you. Bastard, she spat at him, and she thought he had moved closer. She swung at him, then suddenly he was where he had been standing all along, the coward. I'm still going to kill you, but not where you'll bleed on my deck. Althea! The beloved voice was shocked with worry for her, but there was something else there too, something she couldn't name. She turned and after a blurry moment found Vivacia looking back at her. She should have been joyful, not anxious. It will be all right, she assured her. I'm here now. So she's like staggering around. Jack helps her over to the railing and says, I'm here now. What has he done to you? What has he done to you? And then we get Althea's description of Vivacia, but not.
Right. And I just want to say, I think this is one of the biggest, misunderstandings that Althea has, that she thinks that it's Kenneth's fault.
Right.
That everything has happened to Vivacia and that Vivacia was buried down. She keeps accusing Kennit of that, which is part of the reason why Wintrow is confused and really trusts her and doesn't know what she's talking about.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's more Wintrow's fault that this has happened, but it's not really anybody's fault, right?
Yeah. Bolt is just so vindictive that she was holding Vivacia down.
Right. But I think in the brief time that they were together, it wasn't really explained to her what was happening.
Right.
And she hasn't met Bolt. She hasn't seen what has happened to the figurehead. She hasn't experienced that aside from when she touched the ship and then got queasy.
And Vivacia's explanation when she was in the dark of just like, she's holding me down. I can't feel the wind and stuff.
Right.
That feeling stuck through to her back to life.
Wakefulness, yeah.
But not the she pronoun.
Right. So she is really, obviously there's reason for her to be angry at Kennit. So also the fact that he would do something to her ship would be horrendous. And to be fair, maybe that's how she can explain to herself why he has control over the ship, why the ship would take his side.
Yeah.
Because he has some
looking for that reasoning.
Exactly. But I do want to keep pointing out that she keeps saying that it's his fault, but
that's one of the things that confuses everybody.
Yeah, that's why everybody thinks she's crazy, because they're like, what are you talking about? And even for the ship's point of view, it's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But the ship doesn't explain it to her and doesn't correct her. She's just like, okay, crazy. Kind of didn't do it.
Yeah, so Althea is looking at Vivacia and is like, well, it's familiar, but not. It's not quite Vivacia here. And she grips the railing and she thinks that once upon a time they had fit together like puzzle pieces, but now it was as if she gripped Jack's hands or Paragon's railing. It was Vivacia, but she was complete without Althea. Yet Althea was not complete without her. The places she had expected the ship to fill were still empty and ached more horribly than ever. I am one now, the ship confirmed softly to her. The memories of your family have merged with the dragon. It had to be, Althea. There was no going back to denying her any more that she could truly go on without me. You don't begrudge me that, do you? That I am whole now? But I need you! The words broke from her before she could consider what they meant. Terrible to blurt out to all a truth you had never recognized yourself. How can I be myself without you? just as you have been. She heard her father's wisdom in the words, and elder sapience as well. But I'm hurt. You will heal, Vivacia assured her. You don't need me. The knowledge of that sent her reeling, to have come all this way, striven so hard and lost so much, only to discover this. Love can exist without need, Vivacia pointed out gently. And in the sea below, several serpents had risen to regard them gravely. Either her eyes were still tricking her, or the yellow-green one was deformed, so we know that she who remembers is one of those watching.
Yes.
And somewhere, Wintrow grabs the railing and says, "Oh, ship, you feel beautiful." Althea felt an odd tension run out of him. You make sense now. You are complete. Go away, Althea told him distinctly. You need to rest, he told her gently, mealy-mouthed, empty courtesy, just like Kennit's. She swung at him, but he jerked his head back. Go away, she shouted at him. Tears started down her face. Where had her strength gone? She lurched with the realization that the ship did not reach out to her and supplement her in her need. Vivacia speaks quietly and says, You must do that for yourself now, Althea. Each of us must. Althea feels like it's her own mother pushing her aside, and she tries to plead with Vivacia here, saying, But you were with me. You know what he did to me, how he hurt me. Not exactly, the ship replied gently. And in those words, the separation was complete. The ship was a separate creature from her now, and just as capable of misunderstanding her as any human, just as capable of disbelieving her.
So heartbreaking.
Yeah, the next paragraph is even more heartbreaking, but we'll talk about this for now.
Yeah. I feel like it just gets worse and worse for Althea.
It does,
But especially in this conversation, right? Obviously, I don't like using this phrasing, but she isn't in her right mind right now because she has been drugged. This awful event has happened to her, and she probably hasn't had any sleep.
Right.
You know, she hasn't been sleeping or eating.
Mm-hmm.
And this is awful. Like, it's just bad timing. She needs time to be able to rest safely. And she hasn't had that. She doesn't get to have time to recuperate and be at her full strength to be there with Vivacia. And I think that
and now that Vivacia's whole, she can't connect with Vivacia because Vivacia can't do that really anymore.
I don't think it's that they can't. I think they are putting a boundary up. I think they're not allowing a connection to happen at this moment because they know that then it'd be hard to get out of it. So I'm reading this not as a they can't anymore, but as a they don't have to and they don't want to.
Okay.
And they don't want to have to support because, again, I think that's too hard of a truth. If they were to connect to Althea, they would see Kennit is lying to them again.
Yeah.
And I think that in that case, it's easier to say, hey, Althea, you kind of have to be on your own now, like to find your own strength. And fair enough. I think it's fair for that boundary to be had. It just feels really callous in this moment.
Yeah,
when
in this
Althea
moment it's callous, but yeah,
help.
It's a good barrier because their relationship before was toxic.
Yes.
Like having Althea be like, I am not complete without you is not a good thing for a human to feel. You can't be that dependent on another thing.
No, the whole thing was unhealthy. Even before Vivacia was awakened and they were on the ship. Like Althea's relationship to Vivacia has been pretty toxic, even though there is love there. It's like it's mirror.
Based on love, yeah.
Yeah, it's a mirror of Paragon and Kennit, right?
Right.
Like there is love there. There is a deep love and respect at the core of what's happening. It's just that the way it is being acted on and consumed by each party is toxic and not healthy and not done well.
Yeah.
And so, like, it is coming from a place of love and care. It's just not good. Yeah. It's not good.
But in this moment.
But obviously, in this moment, Althea's feeling so vulnerable. Nobody's believing her. Nobody's listening to her. Mm-hmm. And she has the one being she thought, they'll take my side. She will take my side. The ship loves me no matter what. She knows that I'm telling the truth. Nobody can blame me. This can't be a repeat of what happened with Kefria. it's fine. Like it'll still hurt, but I'll get over it, is what she said. Like, because I have the ship with me.
Right.
And then it doesn't happen.
And this next paragraph, as I mentioned before, is even worse because it brings up Althea's self-doubts. And Vivacia talks about, like, we've been together for a long time. All the years you lived aboard me, all the dreams you dreamed with me before I awoke, I shared them. And this is not the first time a nightmare like this has plagued you. Devon did you a great wrong, Althea, and it was not your fault. It was never your fault, and neither was Brashen's death. You don't deserve to be punished. So Althea, in her mind here, is like, okay, well, all the connections between pain and fault, between Althea's wicked willfulness and the deaths of those she loved and the bad things that had happened to her because she deserved bad things, cause and effect suddenly spun dizzyingly around her. So she goes on this whole thing of listing, if this hadn't happened, this wouldn't happen, this happened to happen, it's all because of me.
Right. This is something I inherently deserve.
Yeah.
I don't deserve good things happening to me. And it's because I willfully choose to do things my way instead of making others happy. And it's really sad because I think the ship was trying to comfort her in a way, but it's just the wrong way. It's horrible. It's just like, oh, well, this isn't the first time nightmares like this have plagued you. Like, what happened with Devon was bad, but you can't put that on Kennit.
Yeah, let's totally dismiss the possibility for it to happen again, ever.
Yeah, like it only happened the one time and it could never happen more than that.
Yeah.
And it just...
And this is all in front of Jack too. And Althea is resigned here. She's like, okay, I need to go back to my room. And Jack's like, I'll take you. But I wanted to point out that happens in front of Jack because Jack hears that, right? So even if she was thinking of like, oh, maybe Althea does have some truth to her, she hears her own ship being like, it's a nightmare.
It was just a nightmare. It's fine.
Yeah.
This couldn't have happened.
Ugh.
Just bad.
Althea had no chance.
No. And on top of that, I think the worst part to me is that Althea is like having this raw, vulnerable moment where she's breaking down in front of the ship. She doesn't want to be acting like this in public, right? But it's the first time she's seen her ship since, I don't know, for 2 years.
Yeah.
And she's finally getting to see her ship again. It's not the ship she remembers. It's not allowing her a connection. There's just nothing. And on top of that, she's having this sort of breakdown in front of Kennit too.
Yeah.
Kennit's there. Mm-hmm. And so is Wintrow and Jack, but Kennit's there. And she's having this vulnerable heart-to-heart with her ship in front of the man who put her in this position.
Yeah.
And he gets to watch as nobody believes her.
Oof.
That's just like extra awful. And I hate it all. And I just like, it's so sad because she's sitting here like, well, I do deserve this. I deserve everything bad. It's all my fault. And you know what? Yep, I need to get away from here. Mm-hmm. Valid. I would want to get out of that situation too. But, oh, it's just heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking that she has to do this in front of an audience. And I don't know. It makes me so sad.
Some time has passed and we're in Wintrow's head.
Right.
He knocks on the door.
Before we get to Wintrow's point of view, I do also just want to say, Wintrow, when he comes up beside Althea, which like, not the moment, bud. Maybe have your moment with Vivacia alone without Althea's whole thing. She's clearly going through something. But he comes up, he touches the railing and he says, you feel more natural or whatever.
You're beautiful. You feel more complete.
You feel more complete, yeah. Which indicates that they still can reach each other.
Yeah.
There is some sort of level of connection that is still available.
But Althea also felt that too, right? She felt like, oh, it was like a whole being. We don't fit together anymore because Vivacia doesn't need me. Yeah,
like it felt more like holding Jack's hand rather than, I guess, touche.
So, it's just the way that they interpreted it.
Yeah.
And their needs at the time, I think.
True. Yeah, not exactly the best headspace to come and find out that you're not needed.
Yeah. But now, as I mentioned, we are in Wintrow's point of view, and he taps on the door and says, like, Kennit thought you might want some women's clothing. Jack scowled as if he had already offended her, but stepped back and waved him in. Althea sat on the bunk, her knees drawn up to her chest. A pallet had been made up on the floor for Jack. She looked better in a haggard but alert way. The tension in the room suggested he had walked in on an argument. His aunt glanced disdainfully at his burden of slithering fabric. Take them away. I accept nothing from him. Wait, Jack intervened. She gave Althea an apologetic look. I've been in these clothes since we went overboard. So Jack wants to change. She just wants to be like a little bit more clean.
She's tired of smelling herself and then tries to convince Althea because Althea smells like vomit and that's gross.
Yeah. Don't you see what those dresses are? They're a bribe, and if I wear one of them, I'd be seen as a whore bought with clothes. No one would ever believe what he did to me. I don't think he intends it that way, Wintrow said quietly. He suspected the gift was more to gain the ship's approval than Althea's, but the look that she shot him silenced him. He did not know how to begin to talk to her. Give her time, he told himself. Let her be the one to begin talking. He shut the door behind him before placing the armload of clothing on the foot of the bunk. He also unburdened himself of a chest of jewelry and several bottles of scent. Jack raises an eyebrow at it and then asks Althea, do you mind if I look through it? And Althea lies, saying, I don't care, you've already made it obvious you doubt my story. So the first time through reading these books ever, you are hoping that Jack believes her. Right. And then this dropped pretty, like a few pages after the hope that someone's on our side is like, oh, you also don't believe me and you've made it obvious already. Is like, are you kidding me?
Like literally no one. Are you serious right now?
Yeah. As another woman too. So this instantly disproves the women always know.
Yeah, women just know. Not Jack. And to be fair to Jack, she again has that preconceived notion of who Kennit is, and not only that, but she hasn't been mistreated.
Right. So she explains here, you don't lie, Althea, but the circumstances make me have doubts. The whole thing just doesn't make sense. Why would he do that? He has a woman of his own. He's forbidden rape on his ship. His reputation is that of a gentleman. And back in Divvytown, no one spoke ill of him. He saw me twice every day, treated me with courtesy despite the chains. Even the ship herself is shocked at the idea he might do such a thing. So yeah, she's like listing all the things that we've talked about, how the deck is stacked against Althea. And Jack's like, well, you don't lie, but also I think you believe yourself, but it's not reality.
Right. Yeah. Like she's nicely trying to say like,
you're crazy. It was a nightmare.
It definitely didn't happen, but like you believe it happened and I believe that you believe it.
Yeah.
And that's not great. That doesn't feel good.
No.
And she tries to, lighten the mood by joking about how she won't be running rigging in the dresses that were brought to them.
And Althea tries to demand like, oh, so you think it was a poppy dream? And Jack's like, well, he gave me poppy syrup too, and I did have really bad dreams. I hate him, but for him, my friends would still be alive. Despite that, he displays a sense of honor that it wasn't a dream. She turns to Wintrow as well. You don't believe me, do you? You've become his meek little follower, haven't you? You gave our family ship over to him without a fight. And before Wintrow could speak up, Jack speaks up because Althea is switching her attention between the two, not allowing them to answer. So Jack is continuing the conversation here, saying, put yourself in my place. What if I told you that Brashen had attacked me? Think how difficult that would be for you to accept. You've been through a horrible experience, near drowned, recovered only to find your ship and all hands in Brashen drowned. You're grieving. It is natural for you to hate Kennit and believe him capable of any evil. It could turn anyone's mind. It didn't turn your mind. Jack was silent and then in a quieter voice said, I'm grieving in my own way. Amber wasn't some chance-met acquaintance. I've cut a lock of hair to mourn her. Not that I expect you to understand that. But I lost a friend, not my lover. You lost Brashen. It's bound to affect you more strongly.
So before we continue on, because I feel like we're doing a lot, I want to talk about how I feel like it's really unfair for Jack to do a whataboutism with a person they both know, and that is the lover of Althea, not just a random stranger that they both met. You know what I mean? Like, because okay, if we're gonna do a whataboutism, then you can't pick some completely different scenario. This is apples and oranges. And on top of that, doesn't even give her the chance for Althea to say, then I'd believe you. It just is like, well, you wouldn't get it. You obviously lost your mind because of everything that's happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also very frustrating because maybe Althea would have believed her. And you know what I mean? Like, and we don't know. It didn't happen.
Like, oh, you say you were climbing a hill and rolled all the way to the bottom and didn't injure yourself? What about if I was climbing a rock wall and fell and didn't break anything? See how ridiculous that is, Althea? Besides, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
It doesn't like...
It's not the same thing. It just like is really frustrating. And I don't want to... It's so hard because I don't want to be like, well, because obviously Brashen would never do that. And so that's why. But like, even if Brashen did do that, again, still completely different scenario because they knew and trusted Brashen and he
wasn't a captor.
He wasn't a captor. He didn't lock anybody up. He didn't, like he's their friend. So it's different scenario, even if that were to have happened.
Now, in fairness, I'm taking the other side, not every scenario needs a devil's advocate, but for Jack's point that everyone talked well of Kennit, that is something that is a fact. And even Althea was like, this guy seems great.
Right.
So apparently everyone else is very convincing about how good Kennit is.
Right.
So that does, again, count against Althea's recounting of her events.
Right.
Because Jack is like, everyone's convinced this guy's good. It can't have happened. I'm sorry, Althea.
Right. And I think this really goes to show, like, this goes to this theory of like, there needs to be a perfect victim. Like, this is talked about a lot in things that happen to people, that like the victim is never perfect enough. Because the situation there's always leniency there. There's always this sort of like, well, what were you doing though? And like, could what you have done be misconstrued to that person that made them think it was okay?
Right.
And if that's not the case, are you sure it even happened that way? Are you just saying that to get attention because you feel like this is a good for your reputation or you're going to get something out of this? Like, I feel like there is this natural, you're looking for the perfect victim. And if somebody doesn't fit into that perfect victim box, it can't be true. And that's human nature.
Yeah. You see this in real life all the time. For example, in cases like this, it's walking while being a woman. That's what it boils down to, right?
Right.
How these people are talking. Or if people are, how minorities are disproportionately arrested. It's like walking while being black, things like that. It just boils down to, this is just prejudice against this person. It's not trying to believe them at all.
No.
It's just being like, there's excuses why this happened to you.
Right. There's always an excuse of why it happened or how it couldn't have happened.
Right.
And you see it all the time. And it's really frustrating when it's coming from a friend point of view.
And it's frustrating coming from a fictional story.
It's horrible. And it's like, it's bad that this is happening. And I mean, it happens every day.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's just horrible. People talking down what happened. A survivor knows what happened and it's getting talked down. And I think it's just so frustrating as readers, because you have to sit there and watch everybody say, well, but did it happen to Althea, who it absolutely did happen to? And I think part of why I said this during the action taking place when we were reading the chapter, that the only thing that I liked about that point of view being Althea's point of view is that there is no wiggle room there.
Yeah, it's centered her in the story.
Yes, it's her event. There is no mistaking what happened. There's no ability to wiggle and be like, well, maybe.
No chance to believe Kennit's unreliable narration of events.
There's no way for you to be swayed by him saying, well, it seems like she kind of wants me to do this.
Right.
I appreciate that about this telling. I appreciate that as a reader, you have to know, like, you have to deal with, you have to deal with the fact that, Althea knows, you both know it absolutely did happen. Kennit knows, nobody else believes it. And so you really get that feeling of like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like,
it once again, like we talked about in that episode, it is a good depiction and a good, in quotes, it's a realistic depiction of what can happen in real life, and that is good for some people who would not have been might have not have been exposed to this sort of scenario in real life.
Right.
And goes back to that email that we got a long time ago of that person mentioning that they appreciate this depiction because it could educate some people.
Right.
And this is the next step of that situation.
Yeah, and I really do hope that this was able to bring sympathy into people's lives by experiencing it through this book. Like, I don't obviously want anybody to ever...
So frustrating to read.
Yeah, and hopefully that does allow you to walk with sympathy in real life. You know what I mean? Like, and ultimately, what are books for if not to experience things through different people's point of views and gain empathy? But like, especially this sort of really touchy subject where you have to live with Althea through the fact that everybody's just believing this horrible person, Kennit, and he's very easily manipulating the situation. He's not even that good of a guy, and he's getting away with it. Yeah. Like, it's just, ugh.
So Jack is talking to Althea here, saying, you lost Brashen, I lost Amber. She was my friend, but he was your lover. And Wintrow's like, lover? What's going on? And Althea immediately sees that change in expression and glares at his scandalized expression, saying, yes, I was sleeping with Trell. I suppose that you share your mother's opinion of that. Can't rape a whore, right, Wintrow? The injustice of her words stirred his own anger. He stood his ground. So that is right there something that Althea, obviously very frustrated and angry right now at the world, but lashes out at Wintrow because of her thoughts about how Keffria reacted to her situation with Devon. And it's like, oh, you think like your mother, don't you?
To be fair, it's really, again, things are set up against Althea because, but they're also set up against Wintrow in this instance because he is both Kyle and Keffria's son.
Yeah.
And he's not really in control of his reactions.
And on the crew of Kennit.
And Kennit's crew. He literally, like...
He's the trifecta of, like, Althea will hate you now.
Yes. Yes. There is not really a lot of saving grace in this for Wintrow, but he doesn't ever help himself either to make himself less dislikable to Althea. And, I mean... I don't know. Like, obviously, like you said, she's really angry right now and she is just kind of lashing out.
Yeah.
And valid. Like, it's
valid. Yeah.
Obviously, I would also be furious and fuming and lashing out at everybody. And of course she thinks he thinks that way because she doesn't know him and he isn't exactly being nice to her. He doesn't care about her. He hasn't shown that he cares about her.
Right. As we mentioned before earlier in the chapter, every single time he chose Etta instead. And now when he's walking in, he hasn't really had a chance to do anything.
Right.
And so he tries to stand up for himself. And in his head, he's like, well, enduring Etta's temper had taught him some courage at least. And he's trying to defend himself logically here. And that's not the place. He's used to Etta's temper when he had been teaching her things, right? Teaching her those philosophies. And this isn't
a teaching situation.
Yeah. He's being like, I didn't condemn you. I was just surprised. It's, I have a right to be shocked too. I'm right to have my own feelings.
This is where he goes wrong. I have a right to be shocked. It's not what one expects of a trader's daughter, but that doesn't mean and he gets cut off.
It's like, F you, Wintrow, because you're exactly what I'd expect of Kyle Haven's son.
There, he kind of got that with, I wouldn't expect that of a trader's daughter. Like, bro, this is not the time.
Right, yeah. Like I said, he tries to take that kind of logical, like, I have the right to my own feelings as well. You don't have to lash out at me, but he's not putting himself into her shoes at this point. It's like, that's not the kind of argument she wants to hear. Just like say, no, I'm not surprised. Like, come out right with it. Say, I do believe you.
Right. I think that's what's really frustrating in this instance is that he's being so defensive of how she's treating him. Yeah. He doesn't care how he's coming across to her. He doesn't care that what he's done up until this point hasn't really put him in a favorable light. He doesn't care to think about maybe why she would immediately assume that everybody is against her when everyone has been against her this whole time, even the ship. And so for him to get in here and be all high and mighty and play his little, like, "Ugh, well, I have a right to feelings, you know. Nobody's arguing that, Wintrow. She's hurt and lashing out, and I feel like you of all people should be able to recognize that."
Right.
And that, again, is bringing me to my huge anger with Wintrow in this chapter. I have very little sympathy for Wintrow, and in this chapter specifically, and I hate the way that he chooses to act in every single instance. Like, every point of choice he has, every time he makes a choice, I'm like, nope, wrong. It's bad. You're not doing well.
So she retaliates, saying, like, you're exactly what I'd expect of Kyle Haven's son. And obviously that stings him a lot because his father enslaved him.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
So he's like struggling to keep his voice steady. He's like, that wasn't fair. You want to be angry with everyone, so you're putting meanings to my words that I don't intend. You haven't given me a chance to speak at all. I haven't said I don't believe you. You don't have to say it. You are standing with Kennit proves what you believe. Get out and take that with you. She extended a leg to kick the chest disdainfully. He walked to the door. Maybe I'm not standing with Kennit. Maybe I'm standing with my ship. Shut up. I don't want to hear your excuses. I've heard enough. If you carry on like a madwoman, people will treat you like one, he warned her harshly. And he shuts the door and hears a bottle crash against it. He shut his eyes for a moment, and some of her accusations had been fair, he forced himself to admit. He wouldn't have believed her. Her story was illogical and implausible. He doubted that anyone on board believed what she said about Kennit, except for him. And it wasn't her word that had forced him to believe her, it was Etta's.
Yeah.
That is one thing that Wintrow is good about. Like, he is young, he does lash out, he doesn't have the social awareness to apply different things to different scenarios. He always kind of defaults to the one thing, but he can reflect and take some of those criticisms sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's better than a lot of other characters can do. So
True.
he can recognize, like, yeah, I did stand with Kennit. I didn't believe her at first. And the only reason I do believe her now is because I have a different woman saying it.
Right.
He recognizes that that isn't fair and not great, but also he's still mad at Althea. He's like,
how dare she call me Kyle's son?
Yeah, she's raving like a madwoman, so obviously people will treat her like one. That was him lashing out.
That
obviously
was a really low blow.
It was, yeah.
I really don't appreciate that. I think especially, like, I get that she got under his skin with that Kyle comment.
Yeah.
But he literally just said, you know, I wouldn't expect that of a lady, which is not the right timing, like I've said. And then she says, you're just what I expect of Kyle Haven. And, like, I get that they don't get each other's context, right? We know what each of them have been through with Kyle.
Yeah, Althea has no idea what Wintrow went through with Kyle, and Wintrow has no idea what actually
how
Althea
his father had treated Althea.
Yeah.
And what he had said to her and all that. So, like, a lot of missing context for both of them that made this a bigger clash than it needed to be.
Yeah.
But I think also him just trying to be like, well, I didn't say I don't believe you. And her, okay, well, you're with Kennit. I don't care what you have to say. I know what you believe because of your actions. And him trying to be like, actions don't mean anything. Because kind of he does believe that. He believes intentions are more important than actions, right?
Yeah.
And so he's like, well, that doesn't mean anything.
Well, yeah, he's saying, I don't stand with Kennit, I stand with my ship. But that also is a dagger to Althea because her ship doesn't believe her.
Yeah, the ship doesn't believe her. And also he's calling it his ship when she thinks it's her ship. Like, it's again another, like, somebody taking something from her. And I get that it's pretty heated in this moment. So, like, how well would I be able to even think if barbs are being thrown in this position?
Right.
But, like, I think it's just silly that he's immediately resorting to giving into her anger and fighting back with anger of his own, and then telling her, you know, well, everybody's going to treat you like a mad woman, which is horrible to say to a woman who has been denied that what happened to her has happened to her. And he's like, well, you deserve it for how you're acting. Seriously? I don't know. And then we get to the whole, like, well, I wouldn't have even believed her if it wasn't for Etta, which also grinds my gears.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that, but it is, at least, like I mentioned, in self-reflection. He recognizes that that's not a great thing,
right?
But that's the truth of it. He's acknowledging that.
Yeah, but also he didn't stand up for her at all when Jack is sitting there being like, Why would he do it? There's no way. He doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
He doesn't interject. He doesn't help. And I think that's what I have problem with too, right? Like we have all these people who say they believe her. All these people. There's like 3 people. There's people who believe her and do nothing to help her. And then that's
why I mentioned that first confrontation where he ends with saying like, this is not how I would expect a lady to respond or whatever. After her first accusation of like, yeah, you probably think like your mother. He should have said, no, I don't think like my mother. I do believe you. Instead, he goes into the whole logical, like trying to lay out and reason with somebody.
Yeah. Let me explain why I had the thought that I had.
Yeah. But if he had said, no, I don't think like that, and I do believe you, it would have diffused literally everything else that came on that page.
Truly. And instead, he had to do the Wintrow way, which is who he is. And that's his character. It's whatever. I'm being extra picky because I'm obviously very frustrated with the whole situation.
Well, it's written so well because it's so frustrating, right? It evokes so much deep emotion from us reading these passages. Yeah. It's just that you don't want to compliment the writing because it's so awful.
It is great writing. It is great writing because of, I don't know. There is a lot of feeling. And obviously there has to be that world building to get to this point. There has to be those characters that are fully fleshed to feel this way.
And consistent, right? So all of these characters are we're jumping in so many different points of view, and these characters are consistent with the way they've acted before, even if it is frustrating.
Like with Wintrow, I want him to be better, but nothing about any of the choices he made were unreasonable to his character.
Yeah.
It was not, Hobb is just doing this to make it frustrating. It's choices that they would be making.
Yeah. The only thing that's real. A little weird is Vivacia to me, but we've talked about that before, how she is basically just born and was wooed by Kennit. That was like her first expression as an individual.
But then also she talks about how she's connected with Althea throughout the whole time Althea has been on her ship, meaning before she was awakened. And so that also makes me mad because it's like, what do you mean you're still picking Kennit, who you've known a year and a half, over her? Like, her heart. I don't know.
It's shared dreams rather than again, I think we've briefly touched on that with live ships that, you can have connections when they're not awakened, but awakened, they're actually individuals. You can actually make a connection. It's not just a link in shared dreams.
Sure.
Same way with, I think later on when Kennit dies or jumps over to the Jamalian ships, she notices how Wintrow steps up and they implicitly trust each other, and Vivacia and Wintrow, and how it's like they've fallen completely into sync with one another. I think it's just like that growing as individuals is what Althea missed out on. And I can see that, I guess.
Okay.
I don't like that she chooses Kennit over Althea, obviously, but I can see the kind of, what we had was cool, but we were like kids in daycare together, and now we've grown apart and we've moved away to different high schools, and I have my best friends now. It's kind of that thing that I see it as.
Okay.
Oh man, this chapter though,
it's really frustrating.
It's a long one. We finished.
Yeah. Sorry that I'm so angry this chapter, everybody.
You don't have to apologize.
I was just about to say I probably will do it again.
Yeah. It's meant to evoke anger, I guess. Yeah. So that's what we got. That's what you guys get.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening this whole episode with us. If you have thoughts on it, please let us know. These are very complicated character development chapters, so please let us know what you're thinking about them if you'd like to share. You can email us at isfitshappy@gmail.com, or you can message us on any of our social medias, Facebook, Instagram. We're on Threads, Blue Sky, Reddit, and YouTube. All at isfitshappy.
We look forward to hearing from you next week. All right. Now it's time for us to talk about what you guys have brought to our attention, our favorite part. And A little bit of a more difficult, I guess, conversations being had, which are good. It's good to have difficult conversations, but
considering the last couple episodes here, last few episodes, there's some comments about it.
Yeah, these topics are more
they're denser.
They're denser, and it's more about the topics of Althea's rape and the consequences after,
and a lot about Kennit too.
And Kennit, yeah, it's I think more focused on Kennit's character, but yeah. So just as a warning, if you normally like listening to this part but you don't want to hear about that, that's what we're talking about. But we will get into it. And the first thing we're going to talk about is a conversation on Facebook for episode 231, which is the chapter 26, Courtship.
Yep, the
chapter, capital T, capital C chapter.
Irene left a comment here talking how kind of a little bit of an anecdote for them about Buffy the Vampire Slayer and how there is an episode that just where a character Spike assaults Buffy and it just seems gratuitous and over the top and maybe just there to remind you that that character is bad.
Right.
And that's kind of how they feel about what Kennit did. And on subsequent rereads and things like that, that chapter doesn't exist, same as that episode for Buffy doesn't exist for them. Like, they don't need that reminder that Kennit is a bad person. They know what happens, and they just move on with their lives in the reread.
Right. And I found it really interesting that Irene specifically said, was the author scared that we would like Kennit too much and that we would be cheering for the bad guy? There are several things that don't make sense, and it just all comes together as why was this put in, which I think is something I also struggle with. So I really agree with where it feels maybe everybody's starting to like Kennit too much. So, you put that in to be like, hey, reminder, not a good guy. We don't like Kennit.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. So it's definitely an interesting conversation to have. And another listener, Degenhart, actually had a response to this, and they're both coming at it, I think, from the same side, right? Like that it is an awful thing to read, but Degenhart's more so saying, like, I think there is in book reasons why Kennit would do this and why he thinks the way he does and how he reacts the way he would act.
Yeah.
So it is tough, and Degenhart says that he still struggles with the fact of the assault happening in there, but it does seem on par with someone as emotionally broken as Kennit.
Yeah.
Which I think is also a good perspective. And this kind of just highlights the different readings that people can get out of these things, right? Because you've talked about a lot how these are fantasy escapism books. You don't need every gritty detail in there.
Right.
And yet we've also talked about how we got that previous message that these things are good to portray for people who would have never been able to put themselves in those shoes.
Yeah.
And it's been proven in studies that reading books, and I think especially fantasy, maybe I'm just making that up as a fantasy sci-fi stan, increases your empathy for people around you. So like, there are reasons to include some of these things, especially the way that Robin Hobb writes in a fully realized world with characters who act realistically. But for some people, it just doesn't need to happen because it's implied and you're fine with that.
Right. No, I think it is one of those things that it is important. It feels like an important conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah.
I just can't always get behind it happening the way that it does in this book, but I also recognize that it is helpful for some people.
Yeah, definitely.
But I do agree with Irene's not wanting to read that chapter on rereads and just kind of like, it happens. Yep. Let's skim through and get to the next part.
Yeah. Irene specifically calls out some of the details in there, being like, why did this need to be mentioned?
Yeah.
Why do you go into these things?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it is, I don't know. Yeah. It's important. And I'm happy if it can help people understand the situation better.
Yeah.
I just personally don't like it.
Yeah.
And that's allowed. So
it's definitely allowed. Definitely. So thank you to both of them Yeah, it's a tough chapter to read and talk about, but I think it definitely merits some conversations around that.
Yeah. And that conversation kind of leads into an email that we got from Anna.
Yeah.
And that email is about Kennit. And like Dagenhart's idea that he's just emotionally stunted, it's sort of looking at the morality of that, again, of Kennit
Right.
in general, which is a really interesting topic that I think is worth discussing.
And again, since we are talking about Anna's thoughts here, I will preface this by saying that Anna in the email here says like it is completely despicable. This is just like thought exercise about the morality or the reality of blame and guilt and things like that.
Right. And so I don't want this to seem like Anna was coming forward and being like, pro Kennit, we need to forgive him.
Completely
no.
opposite.
Anna also agrees that it's not excusable. This is not okay. Kennit is definitely guilty and definitely should be held accountable. However, there are questions. And I think that the questions are important to talk about as well. And that's absolutely okay to do, I think, especially when it's a fictional character. And especially when you have all these otherworld magic elements to think about.
Yeah, so Anna is talking about an episode of Radiolab, which is another podcast. And that is an episode on the concept of guilt and blame. And they mention that this episode was about a man who had a compulsion to download CP. And obviously police were involved and everything like that, but doctors found was it a tumor?
A tumor in his brain,
and removed it, and then that compulsion disappeared.
And so he, I believe, was found not guilty because the compulsion went away. He wasn't going to do it.
Because the courts found him not wholly culpable and like in charge of his actions.
Right. It was due to the tumor. It wasn't him making that decision. It was something out of his control. And so
Anna says like the absolutely horrible, unforgivable thing he was doing was no longer a thing he wanted to do.
Right. So I think that
it's such an interesting conversation because this is how obviously some of you can see where we're going with this in this conversation, but it's an interesting topic to discuss with Kennit because we've talked a lot about how Kennit is partially forged.
Yes.
How Kennit has been traumatized and abused all of his life and has never like matured past that point. Same as like we've talked about how Fitz partially forged himself and he hasn't matured past those emotions.
Yes.
Kennit did that when he was like 13, 14 and he mass murdered everybody on a ship.
Right. And he, not only that, but was also victim to a different type of abuse. There's no worse or better, obviously, when it comes to abuse, but his circumstances before being forged were completely different to Fitz's as well. And so his working through that never happening has different outcomes, obviously.
Yes.
And so Anna also brings up with the thought process in mind of this man being found by the courts as not guilty because of a tumor. What does that mean in terms of like, if this was a fully forged person, you wouldn't blame that person when they become unforged for what happened.
Right.
So does that give Kennit a little bit of leeway? Like, would he still be a monster if he hadn't been forged at all? Would this still have happened with all of his pieces intact? Or is this because of the tumor, so to speak?
I think that's a very important part to the fully forged people with blame, because in the next trilogy, they kind of talk about that, right? Because isn't Riddle forged for a second?
I'm not sure. I don't remember. But I do know
somebody is like forged and they free them, and we kind of temporarily know them a little bit in the books, and they can remember everything that they were doing, but didn't have any way to stop it or stop themselves. So I think that's very important to relate to this because it does bring up interesting questions about blame.
Right. And what happens. And I think it is good to look at things like that, especially in this case where there are external factors that are directly impacting Kennit and his choices. And it is hard to know if Kennit would turn out the way that he is without the interference of having his bad memories taken away by paragon.
Right.
And it's not even just his bad memories, right? We know that a lot of his memories of his mother were taken. It's much like Fitz. Like, it wasn't just bad things. It was also good things that hurt to remember.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that is also important.
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, maybe that is why he is the way that he is.
Yeah.
But again, as Anna states, it doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make it right.
Right. Yeah. And
But
Anna again says, like, absolutely not excusing it. It's unequivocally abhorrent
and not okay.
and not okay. But it's a very interesting conversation.
Yeah. And it is a good thought to have, because I think.
Because how far do you go? Right.
Yeah.
Do you blame, like, do you not place any blame on Fitz then for any of his, like, not caring about things, the way he raises Hap? Like, do you place blame on him because he was partially forged? Of course you do, because he was kind of a bad father, and we'll talk about that in the next trilogy.
Will get there. But it's so interesting to think about the reasons why bad things happen, I think. I think it's a nice little exercise to do. It's not, things don't just happen, right? Everything has a reason, whether or not that reason is okay. I mean, reason doesn't equal the thing happening being fine.
Right.
It just gives you the context. And I think sometimes that helps grapple with the big feelings that you can get. And I think, especially for me, reading the chapter, uppercase, it's hard to get past the frustration of it even happening to really think about everything else. And so I think having that thought process, being able to think about Kennit's point of view, how horrible that is, but thinking about what made him that way, I think can sort of give more humanity to Kennit in that. And it like helps to sort of take away the feeling of monster. Like, Kennit's this monster. We can just label him as a monster and throw him away, because people aren't monsters.
Yeah.
They're people. And I think that is a really important discussion to have.
That was another conversation that someone, I think, brought up a few weeks ago too.
Yeah. That it's really easy to just say they're a monster, be done with it.
Yeah.
It's really hard to look at the monster in depth and think that is a human being who has thoughts, feelings, and emotions.
And made choices.
And so I think I really like that Anna brought this to our attention, because I think it is a really good way to step into that, especially maybe for people like me who are having trouble seeing past the monster. To just think, okay, well, it doesn't have to be about the monster. It can be about what led to the monster being created.
Yeah.
And I think that helps.
Yeah. Yeah. The concept of blame in this is very, very interesting, especially as you apply it to the wider book series. Like, I'm talking about Fitz, even like in a more innocuous sense, or any of the forged ones. And I kind of fall on the side of, if you're partially forged, especially someone who has been partially forged so long ago, you've still grown as a person. You've still made choices to get here. And then you consciously make that choice. It's still to blame. Just like Fitz is with being, not caring about the world around him and not raising Hap super well. And the same as Kennit being who he is. They've all made choices to get there. Now, if he was partially forged the day before, maybe like
there's more empathy there of like he didn't have any chance.
There's no adjustment period. There's no you lose your part of your humanity there or something. But yeah, it's a very interesting conversation, especially with the magic involved.
Yeah, and definitely worth having.
Yeah, for sure. Anna also talks about the conversation that we had around suicide, how you specifically were, and Anna appreciated how you specifically were talking and using the books as a jumping off point about how to speak about suicide as a concept and people's reactions to it and their thoughts surrounding it, and really appreciates fiction and how that's a great place to do that and have those larger conversations. Like this one that we just had too.
Yeah. No, I think it is good. And I think Anna gets to this point as well, to have that common jumping off point, because I mean, like we were just saying, everybody's human, right? We have different experiences. Like what brings us to the books and what we get out of the books are so different, but the one thing that's the same is the words in the page, right? And so I think what I appreciate about our community that we've built with this podcast and our conversations that we have here is that we get to look at all of your opinions as well as our own, and bring in that coloring to the book and sort of learn more about each other and the books and the world as a whole. And I think it's really nice to be able to do that, because I think it helps in some small way with humanity and having that empathy and going forward in life, right? And it is hard topics that are in these books. It is hard to talk about, but having that same jumping off point, we're all on the same page, we all know what we're talking about, and then bridging into these bigger ideas, I think is really cool and important, because it helps have those hard discussions.
Right.
And we're not the only ones doing it. There is another podcast a person on TikTok and Instagram, prof.jw. And apparently this person uses the Harry Potter series as a jumping off point to talk about societal and cultural issues. And so it's just like a really nice way to sort of bring up it's
relatable to more people.
Yeah, and help talk about things that are hard and contextualize them in a way, I guess. And so I really like that about fiction, I guess. And talking about it with friends and others, acquaintances.
So thank you very much, Anna, for the well thought out email.
Yeah, we really appreciate
that discussion, and it's very super interesting topic.
Yeah, and thank you to everybody who writes in. I know this one is a little bit tougher, but we really do appreciate it all, and it's good to have those thoughtful conversations. And even when they're not thoughtful, they're just, I like this person. I think it's fun.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
We appreciate hearing from all of you and getting your points of view. And thank you
whatever
for
those comments may be.
Yes, even if it's that we're wrong. So thank you guys, and we look forward to hearing from you next week.